Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast.
Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Katie.
Hey, Katie. How are you?
Great question, Jim. I have had better starts to the podcast, I would say.
Yes, you have. Yeah.
Coming off a pretty tough week. And I wanted to reflect a little bit on something that's kind of funny about podcasting. Obviously, this is not really a podcast that's like about our lives, but our lives intersect with the podcast a lot, so stuff comes up. And with the lag between when we record a podcast and when stuff goes live, sometimes it's not totally lined up with what's actually going on in life. So the podcast that came out this last week with Elena, I spent a whole lot of time talking about how I had gone to California. I was no longer vitamin D deficient, at least I thought. I was feeling amazing, like better than I'd felt in like 3 months. And then a couple days after that, things totally changed in my life in a way that's been a little bit hard. So I wanted to talk about that, not really because it's about me, but more because I think there's a lot of really, really relevant insights that impact athletes. You know, as a coach, we see people go through stuff, big LSS events all the time, and there are physiological effects on that. So maybe I'll get us started today in this grab bag episode with some insights on sort of my last week, if you're open to it.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, I want to hear your insights. And like you said, we're going to have just a grab bag of endurance coaching, training insights today. But yeah, let's start with you. Tell us what's going on, because I think it's super relevant to, we all face life, right? And you've obviously faced some big life stuff recently, and which we're sorry to hear about.
Yeah. So I was in California for work, as I talked about last week on the podcast, and I got some very sad news while I was out there that my grandmother on my mom's side had passed away very unexpectedly. She was in great health, and it was sort of kind of a freak thing. And it's hard because if anyone's been listening along for a little while, I also lost my grandfather on the other side just a couple months ago. So it's been kind of like this tough back-to-back experience of, I haven't really experienced like big loss like this before, and I am very, very close with all of my grandparents. So that has been hard, kind of back to back. And of course, there's a lot of logistics that come up when stuff like that happens. I'm in California. I have to get back to the East Coast. I had to fly to Syracuse. I was kind of all over the place on a lot of flights, not really getting any sleep. And meanwhile, I am kind of in the middle of a training cycle. And so I wanted to start by just talking a little bit about observations on what sort of high LSS or even kind of grief can do to you physiologically. And unfortunately, I think I also talked about this a couple months ago, but again, like losing people that we love is a pretty universal experience. I'm not sitting here saying like I'm unique and something special happened. It's sad. We all will be in that club at some point in our lives. Many people already have, but this is just what I've sort of noticed as I've been going through it more intensely recently. So a couple things when we talk about metrics: resting heart rate, crazy high through the roof when there is a high LSS event. HRV is like plummeting, not doing so well. I think something else that stands out to me is in-workout heart rate for me for several days was just crazy. Going to threshold at what should be a zone 2 pace on a run, for example, because there's just a lot of emotion there and a lot of stress there. And I think a lot of that, too, is driven by the fact that my sleep and my fueling have been like a 2 out of 10 recently. I'm probably someone who, when I'm more stressed out, that's the first thing to go, especially with sleep, like not really being able to fall asleep or waking up a lot in the night just because there's a lot going on, not really having the same appetite as usual. And then all of those things kind of enter this feedback cycle where it's like extra hard to then feel better in your workouts and really, really hard to get on top of it. So I find that when this stuff happens, you do really have to return to the basics of like, what are my basic needs just to be like well for now? And that's totally before you're going to have any conversations about like what your workouts look like. And I think that also led to a pretty big reality check for me, which is that you kind of need to earn the right to do big and hard workouts. And that sounds a little harsh to say, but at the end of the day, if your sleep and your fueling are not dialed, you have to modify to avoid either getting sick. I was coming off being sick just a couple weeks ago, getting injured. Your injury risk, I think, can go through the roof when that's happening, or just kind of ending up burning out from the workouts that you're trying to do. So huge mindset shift needs to happen, even if you're a week out from an A race, even if you're mid-training cycle. The mindset shift that I was thinking a lot about are first, just what kind of movement is going to make me feel better, almost more like emotionally than even focusing on the fitness gains. And any type of fitness gains that would come from that, I think you have to think of as total bonus. Like you have to assume that there's nothing going on, which honestly, there were several days of that just because of life logistics and I had a lot going on. But anything that you put on top of that is a bonus thing. I would also say it's important to just shut anything down that isn't making you feel better. And I found that throughout the week, there was sort of like stops and starts where sometimes I was like, I just need to go for a run. I'm going to feel a little bit better during that run. Other times I'd start going for a run and it was a disaster. And I would like get upset and be like, all right, this is not happening. We need to not be doing this right now. But as I sort of worked through it, I realized outside is usually better. So I was in California for a little bit longer. Getting to enjoy sunshine and stuff like that was pretty nice. And then finally, the reality that there is no like right approach to what the movement should look like. I think for me, like outside runs have usually been the best because running was like my first love in triathlon and it's something that I really love. But hey, if you're a swimmer growing up and swimming is like a safe space for you to sort of process things, I think it can really be any type of workout. But as always, talking to your coach and figuring out what is the right thing here or what's going to best support me. I think we as coaches, if we had an athlete that was dealing with something like this, would immediately say like, hey, what are you going to need right now? What do you think you need? And we're here to help you with that, to give you some ideas, but not to say like, this is the plan and you have to follow it.
Well, yeah, I'm super sorry you're going through all that. That's a huge deal, and grief is, like you say, we're all going to go through it, but it's extra LSS, right? Like we talk about, oh, I'm stressed out about my job, I'm stressed about this, but then you have a death in the family. It's like, oh wow, it's a really big deal. But I like your emphasis on returning back to when we talk about that bottom of the foundation, which is wellness, right? And the wellness is physical health, it's mental health, it's just maybe just slightly moving our bodies just a little bit, but nothing happens unless we are well at the bottom of our pyramid.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that actually, because I used to talk to my grandma on the phone a lot. We would check in very regularly, and she would always end the call usually by saying, "Stay well, Katie, stay well." And I'm like, all right, grandma, we're going to try to stay well right now, because she was very, very big about that. And something else I'll add too is I think depending on the scale of something big that you go through, kind of high LSS, it can be helpful to do a little bit of kind of long-term goal reevaluation, especially thinking about kind of where you are in a training cycle. So I don't have any races that are like around the corner necessarily, but if let's say something really, really big happens and you're 2 weeks out from an A race, I do think it's worth thinking through like what actually are my goals and is this an appropriate time to be going for an A goal? I think you have to eliminate kind of any source of pressure that's on you when this stuff is happening because you are already just under such a high level of stress. So I would say if this happens to someone and they are right before something big, I think pivoting to like, hey, it's a seagull. I'm just going to go in here and try to have fun because I know that I'm under so much pressure right here could be helpful. And of course, like talking to your coach about that and figuring out, do I actually want to do a different race? Does it make sense to say, hey, we're going to take a zero for the next 2 weeks and there's another race that I could do in 6 weeks and maybe I'll be able to regroup? I think that's potentially in order depending on kind of how long term your high LSS thing is. It doesn't have to be grief. There can be like, you lose your job or something really stressful happens in your family or you're dealing with like health stuff, whatever that is. I think it's okay to know that, you don't have to be pushing for this goal that you'd set out. It's always okay to reevaluate kind of based on whatever's going on.
Yeah, I love that. One, we always say, "Hey, you're not a robot," right? Number one, like you're just a human, and number two is that the upside or the fun stuff about racing is it pushes us to places that we would never go in a workout. But the downside of that is like if you're in a place where you're just not that locked in, right? Whatever that is, you're just not on your game. Like that's going to show up during a hard race. So I like your approach of, hey, we know you're going to go deep, in your marathon or Ironman or half or whatever it is. Maybe it's even just a 5K, but we know it's going to be very demanding of you, both physically, but also more mentally. So let's head that off now, right? And let's think through that. Is that something that's going to be good for you to do in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or should we just tack on to something else?
Yeah, and I think any way to take the pressure off, sometimes it can even help to have someone else do that for you. So I've had a couple conversations with coaches I work with about like, hey, what can we do right now to make any goals that are on the horizon like a fun focus or what's going to be more of a stress relief? And sometimes that's, deleting all the workouts out of the training peaks just so you feel like you're not getting a red box. I've done that with athletes before where it's like, hey, something really big is going on and it feels shitty to just like get red box after red box. So let's just delete them. Let's just have anything that we go there truly be bonus. So with metrics and stuff like that. Similarly too, if it's not helpful for you to know that your sleep score was 40 for 3 days in a row, like don't look at it. Turn that off. Not, we've talked about how that's all BS metrics anyway.
Right.
But I think kind of stepping away from data and kind of tuning into how you feel can be really, really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the last thing I'll add here too is I think when shitty stuff like this happens, being kind to yourself is the thing to always go back to. This is something I have discussed on the podcast before, how I'm not very good at. It's not one of my fortes of like being very kind to myself. But I am, of course, screaming what would I say to one of my athletes into the void and asking myself what I would say to a friend, what I would say to a partner. So I would challenge other people to do that, really, really think about that kindness because you're already going through a lot. You don't need to be beating yourself up more about it. And I do think too, really trying to like push through this stuff and not feel it and not grieve it in the way that it should be is not actually a path to better performance. You might think like, okay, I'm hitting my workouts. I'm going to do this. It'll be fine. I'll come out the other side. That will come to get you at another point, later. So I think I thought about this like, all right, this whole week is a wash. Maybe the next 2 weeks are a wash. We're going to see what happens. We're going to do bonus. And then hopefully I'll get back to kind of normal feeling a little bit sooner.
Yeah, I love that point. Like if you push it down, push it away, it's going to come back. I mean, it'll come back like next week, but at some point it's going to come roaring out. And I found for myself that that's kind of stuff comes roaring out, especially when I'm under duress, which i.e. again, a race or a really big workout. And I get super discouraged. I'm like, why am I so discouraged? Like, well, because maybe you didn't deal with some of your squash in your life, and so why is this, this race, or why am I so emotional right now? It's like, okay, well, maybe you pushed down things and this is a chance for it to come out, right? You're down to the
Mhm.
core, right? And this really hard day and this stuff's going to come out. So yeah, I agree. Be kind to yourself and, hey, let yourself go through those emotions, work through them, and then you come back and, it's always, it's temporary, right? In the sense of like,
Mhm.
your athletic career is always there. Right? You can always come back to it.
And any like tough feelings, they're temporary too.
Yeah.
This stuff is really, really hard right after, and
Mhm.
it's hard in
Right.
waves at different times as you're kind of riding it. And it sucks when it's back to back, like, what is going on in our family? And
Mhm.
you know that it will kind of pass. So riding it, I think, is the way to do it. And then, if I can say I have a lot of races in the summer, hopefully if we ride it now, we're not going to have that impact, like these summer races and these long-term goals and all this stuff. And if it does, it's okay. But I think if I were to just like bury all of that, it could come out in a race for
Yeah.
sure. If you go to the well, there's gonna be some dark stuff in there if you haven't processed it well beforehand. So we're in our
Exactly. Yeah.
processing era, not our fitness building era right now.
Right. Exactly. Perfect. Yeah. Right on.
Awesome. Well, I think that was my major insight for today. It's been a busy week, and so Jim has absolutely taken the reins of the outline, which is awesome. And I'm actually going to kind of sit back and ref on all the amazing things that you say. There's some great stuff in here that I have little things to say on, and also just want to shout out to my athletes who've been very patient with my slower than usual response time on training peaks. But Jim, why don't you take it away with some less sad and more exciting coaching and training insights?
Well, first, I just want to acknowledge it. Thank you for sharing that. And I also sort of reflecting back on, this podcast in general, it's a very generous act by you. And every week you shepherd this thing through. And like any good project, there's lots of things in the background that are going on that you're pushing us through. So I just want to just acknowledge your generosity of time for bringing this podcast, to us weekly, even through all these really big life stressors that you're having.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Okay, so let's jump in. Here's a fun one. So I've been holding on this one for a little while because I bought a pair of super shoes I don't know, about a month ago, and I haven't been running all that much, but I've been super excited about them, and I've run them a few times. And now that I've run them enough, I do want to talk a little bit about them. And first thing is that I think the hype is real. What do you think, Katie? Is the hype real on super shoes?
So I'm glad you put this in here because I also got super shoes a couple months ago and I was waiting to kind of like really see if the hype was real. But I agree with you. The hype is so real for the super shoes.
The hype is so real. For example, like just in my average base runs, like it's easily 30 seconds. Mine are, I mean, and also let's put this in context. I haven't been running that much coming back from this big injury. I'm not a great runner, but I've been easily just to be able to gain like 30 seconds a mile on base pace. And then even just my pickups, easy pickups, like a minute faster. And I don't know if you're seeing something similar, but what are you seeing in terms of just like going out for a zone 2 run, you're wearing your super shoes, how much faster are you going on average?
Yeah, I would agree probably on the order of like 20 to 30 seconds for me. It's almost that the shoes just feel like they want to move faster. Like even if I'm more tired, the shoes like are moving my body at a rate that's different. And sometimes when I go back and forth, because we'll talk about this later, but I don't use them for every single run. I kind of go back and forth between my regular shoes. And now when I have the regular shoes on, I feel a little bit like I have these dead legs, which is maybe not the best thing to get used to the super shoes. I am still like I'm sorting out kind of what's the right balance here, but I totally agree. The shoes want to move fast, which gives me probably 20 to 30 seconds per mile faster.
Which I think the second point is that they just make running fun now. And I'm looking forward now. It's like I see them sitting out there. First, they're just like kind of cool looking space age looking shoes, right? And I put them on and I'm like, oh, I cannot wait to go for a run. And even when I finish runs now, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to take these things back out again. So I feel like it's this new toy that's making running fun. And again, I haven't always thought of running as always being that fun, but now I'm like, I really look forward to runs.
Yeah, and I think the best way that I would describe the feeling if you haven't tried them before, it's like it's bouncy. It's almost like if you have little springs on your shoes that just make you bouncier, which is really fun. If you think about like if you were running on a trampoline or maybe the feeling of like those airport walking things that just make you walk a little bit
Yes.
faster than normal walking,
Yeah.
that's sort of what Super Shoes does, which is really, really cool. And I think, I mean, I don't know about you, Jim, but I would recommend anyone who is doing any type of run race really, really consider trying the Super Shoes out because I think you leave a lot of performance potential on the table if you're not doing that. On the flip side, I don't know that I would always recommend them for, Ironman racing, for example, just because for so many of our athletes, that turns into a little bit more of like a walk, run, shuffle situation. And I know some people who are not as comfortable in the super shoes. So that's maybe the only type of race where I'd consider like, yeah, you want to be really, really comfortable. But actually, for me, I've been almost as comfortable in the super shoes as my regular shoes. So I think I would probably wear them for any race.
Yeah, I mean, my experience, and again, this is only my experience, but I have terrible feet, and I never thought out in the world I'd actually fit into a pair of super shoes. And it turns out I actually fit into the Nike Alpha Flies, which I never thought in a million years. And when the guy at the running store said, "Hey, we should try the Nike Alpha Flies," I'm like, yeah, there's no way in hell this is ever gonna fit me. I tried them on. I was like, "Oh my god, these things actually fit me. These are amazing." And the more I wear them, the more comfortable I am in them. So, yeah, I mean, I would recommend them for most people in most races. But right, there's probably some situations where, yeah, if you're run walking, like using your just regular training shoes would be fine too. But I think in general, like you're giving up a lot of time if you're not using super shoes in most racing at this point.
And on brands, I actually wear a different super shoe than you do. So I have really liked the Hoka Rocket X2s. Those are awesome. And they're very, very similar. I wear the Hoka Mach for my regular run shoe. And this is just like the carbon version of that. So I found the transition not that hard. The one thing I will say that has been an issue for me with super shoes in the winter is they have negative traction. Like
Yes.
these are the most slippery shoes you could ever imagine before. And I was out for a run a couple of weeks ago and I was on a bike path that had literally turned into just a sheet of black ice. And it was so bad that I couldn't do it. Like I had to walk over very tentatively over every single stretch of ice because they're so bad for traction. And even if it's just wet out, like I wore these in California and rain one day and I was sort of all over the road with them. So I'd say
Mm.
save these for drier days and drier roads because they are not a durable sort of outdoor rugged shoe for a lot of the New England kind of winter spring conditions that we'll deal with.
Yep. And I think another advantage here is I've been trying to work on like exercises to help me with the toe off and help me with better overall run technique. And they really do. They put you in a better position of toeing off and helping with hip extensions. So that's one thing I'm really enjoying about it. And it'd be interesting now to then go back to regular shoes and see, can I execute the same form with just regular shoes? I don't know yet because now I'm actually just addicted to my super shoes.
And actually, so on that, Jim, I'll ask you, like, what is your recommendation for athletes with how often you're wearing super shoes versus regular run shoes for workouts, easy runs, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably going to evolve, and I think probably right now I'm just high on super shoes. So I've been advocating to all my athletes like, if you don't have a pair of super shoes, one, you should go get a pair of super shoes, and number two is that I'm wearing them a lot. I'm wearing them from all my runs, and I'm finding as I wear them, I'm getting more and more used to them, and I'm sort of figuring out how to use them better. And also that the first version of super shoes, they'd only last like about 100 miles, but I'm now hearing like these super shoes now last for like 300 miles, 400 miles, a lot. So I wouldn't have advocated somebody going out and spending $300 on a pair of super shoes and having it last 100 miles. That seemed very excessive, given triathletes, or I mean, triathletes will do anything, right? But given that they don't break down now, and especially that carbon plate will never break down, and the foam seems really good, and it's not an economic thing now. I think you could wear them a lot, and I'm sort of recommending people like wear them quite a bit, especially with people who are coming up with their first races. I'm saying wear them for most of your workouts because yeah, they are different. They put you in a different position and you just get used to them. And I think the more you wear them, the more you're able to use them as a weapon.
Yeah, I like that. I think for me, the way that I've thought about it is I wear them for run workouts. And if I'm doing any type of like longer run, I would usually wear them. I usually don't wear them for just like my base, I'm going to run easy for an hour or whatever, because I do like being able to preserve this like surprise special feeling at a certain point.
Yeah.
But I don't think that you're doing it wrong if you want to just adjust to these as your regular shoes, because I don't think that the gains that you get are necessarily going to come down. It's more just like this special feeling of like, ooh, I'm extra fast. I'm bouncy. I get an extra gear for more of a racing setting.
Yep. I think what's interesting too about for triathletes too is, typically, running will sap your bike power by about 10%. At least it always saps mine. I can always tell when I'm running more. I look at my FTP or I go for a ride. I'm like, oh, I'm just down some watts. It's because running is just taking some of that power out of your legs. So my theory, and this is a theory, we'll update this later, is that I'll see less of a drop in my bike power this year if I use these super shoes because there's just less wear and tear. So you can go faster. You have less strain on your body and you can do more volume. And I think so anyway, I just think there's a lot of win-wins here. But again, we'll update you as we go along because some of these are just theories right now and I could be completely wrong.
Yeah, we're half science, half theory, or 80-20. Wasn't there something like that?
Right.
I don't know which one is 80. It's like 80% fact, 20% theory that we will update later.
I think we just switch them back and forth. For this one, it's like 80% theory at this point. Like I feel like I'm just sort of I'm high on cocaine of the super shoes, right? It's just like this is the best thing ever. Wear them all the time. Never take them off. I wear them around the house.
You wear them to bed, exactly. I
Exactly.
love that. All right, actually do have one more insight, so I might jump in next on this one. We've alluded in our talking about super shoes and weather to the fact that it is actually getting warmer out. Spring is coming. This week is a little bit nice, it looks like. And I had a listener question or an athlete question, which is, how do I modify my bike workouts if the weather is actually going to be nice enough to ride outside? So a lot of the time, we might put in a very structured Zwift or Training Peaks virtual workout. I had some of my athletes doing tempo 4x14 ascend, which is like these 14-minute intervals, and we're going up in percent of FTP every 2 minutes or something. It's a little bit complicated to follow. And people are like, well, do I have to do that to a T outside? I usually say for the first few rides outside, just go out and ride zone 2. It takes a little bit of a time to adjust to how that feels, especially if you've just been on the trainer for months and months. The idea that you actually have to coast a little bit, you have to balance a little bit, and you can't just turn your brain off, sit up, eat your snacks. All of that's going to be a little bit of an adjustment. So first couple rides outside, even if there's a workout in there, especially for the longer ones on the weekend, don't worry about just going out 2 hours in zone 2. And then later on, if it's going to be a little bit dicey between are you inside, are you outside, and if you do have an interval workout, say for a race sim, I have a lot of half Ironman athletes that are doing sort of half Ironman intervals in their race sims. I'll tell them, hey, go out there and approximate the workout as best you can, but it's never going to be exactly perfect. So if you have like 6 by 10 minutes HIM, half Ironman power, for example, maybe you go out and you do like an 8-minute interval and then a 14-minute interval and then a 6-minute interval, because that's just what the terrain is allowing you to do. I usually just kind of add up the total number of minutes that are in that half Ironman Waddington workout and try to get that in some capacity outside. But even in race day, you're not going to be doing the same perfect power the entire race no matter what. So being able to adapt to those terrain, the conditions, all of that, it is totally okay with me. And once you spend a little bit more time just doing that in zone 2, I think you can get a better feel for how to do more intervals outside. A last thing I'd say on that too is a lot of people are going to be figuring out new routes and how to ride outside. You never want to be sacrificing safety for nailing your intervals. So it's helpful if you can figure out, hey, I know that there's a safe, uninterrupted stretch of road where I can do a 15-minute interval wherever this is, for example. We have a lot of those in the Upper Valley. Sometimes if you're riding kind of more urban, suburban areas, it's harder to find that. So we can just figure out, like, is the intention of the workout today to hit these intervals? Is it to spend time outside? Mixing it up is totally fine. But just know that it doesn't have to be perfect. That's probably the biggest take home of all of this. It's going to be a little bit dicey. Just get on your bike outside, get comfortable. And especially since it's usually dicey weather conditions now too, I think that's probably the best call.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Yeah, focus on zone 2. And I think, yeah, and you say skills. We forget like how much skill there is in going outside, learning new routes. How do I take a snack out of my back pocket? How do I drink and I pocket? How do I make a turn? Like, I've been riding with people recently and they've been like, my turns aren't that good. And you're like, oh, right. Like, I forget, like turning is still a thing, right? You got to turn outside. So there's a huge transition between indoor and outdoor. So zone 2, it's skills. And then, as you mentioned, like, what's the intention of the workout? Eventually, if you get a few of these rides in, and yes, say there's 40 minutes of half Ironman effort. Okay, well, we always talk about this, like your half Ironman effort may not actually be a specific watts. It just may be an intention. Right? It may be like, oh, I held arrow for 40 minutes. Maybe I didn't hit my numbers, but I intended to feel like I was racing in a half Ironman for 40 minutes. And that, boom, that's the intention right there, right? You hit the workout. And even, was it 40 minutes at 85% of your FTP? Who cares?
Yeah, I tell people half Ironman bike effort is like a 6 to 7 out of 10 RPE. Just try to do that feel, even if it's like low watts, even if it's super high watts. There's so many uncontrollable variables out there that if you can just have the intention of a 6 to 7 RPE for some amount of time in a long ride outside, you're doing the right thing to get ready for half Ironman.
Yeah, I always tell people, like, listen, half Ironman pace, for example, is you're going to be on the bike for 3 hours, right, plus or minus, right? So when you go out and you're riding your quote half Ironman intervals, it's, can I hold this effort for 3 hours? And that's number could be really anything. It could be 70% FP. It could be 90% FP, depending on what day it is and what the terrain is and what the wind is doing and what bike you're on and all kinds of stuff, right? But it's like, can I maintain this for 3 hours? Yes. Okay, great. Check. You hit the workout.
And one thing I'll add to that is, can you maintain this for 3 hours and then run a half marathon in your super shoes, but a half marathon nonetheless?
Right, exactly. Don't forget, we have to run afterwards. Oh, I always forget that.
I know, unless you want to do aqua bike, which is a totally defensible thing to do. All right, Jim, what is your next insight? I want to hear about these 3 workout varieties you have in our outline.
Oh, well, I think you're gonna have a lot to say about this because I think we're both in the third bucket here. But so it was just occurred to me that I've been coming off a long cold flu season, and I have a number of athletes who are in the same boat. And so for about a week, I didn't work out at all, and that was appropriate because I just needed to take a zero, and we're sort of adapting. We've talked about this, adapting the workouts to the situation, the high LSS. And so I adapted, meaning I just deleted stuff. I just got rid of it, right? So anyway, I started thinking about the buckets of things and started saying like, okay, the first bucket of workout, which we all want to be at, which is these normal workouts, the NWs, this is just, we're doing the workout, right? You show up, you do the work. There's not much to write about. In Training Peaks, we want most of our workouts to sort of fall into this category: low stress, low friction, consistent. And this is really what forms our foundation. And then a couple of podcasts ago in episode 69 with Neil McKenzie, we talked about sort of the adaptive workout, like when you should adapt things. And we talked a little about this today. When to adapt things, when to delete things, when to change your workouts. Life is dynamic. LSS gets high. You're not a robot. And we're just super proud when our athletes actually take control of their workouts and adapt them to their life situation. So that's great. And then I think there's sort of this third workout I've been thinking about, which is I'm calling the perseverance workout, the PWs. And so, for example, my situation is the second week of having a cold, I realized that I had kind of worked a little bit hard to gain some fitness this winter. I didn't want to lose all my fitness, but I also couldn't do like really hard workouts. So I was thinking more about like adaptive workouts, but I also was realizing that there's just sometimes like it's cold outside. I don't really want to go outside, but I do have this bigger goal of like being fit for this summer. And so I thought, okay, I have to persevere here. I have to sort of build my grit. I do have to go do something, right? And whether it's exactly the workout that I wrote, but I need to get out the door. And I just started feeling like a lot of times in the winter, it's just, you get all these perseverance workouts. Like things just aren't lined up, right? Like it's not that nice out. It's windy out. It's snowing out. It's cold out, right? Like work isn't going well, whatever it is. Like there's lots of barriers, lots of reasons why. But I sort of felt like I have to persevere to sort of keep this fitness going. And so I started thinking more about like perseverance as a workout. But anyway, Katie, what's your take on this?
Well, when you talk about perseverance, the first thing that comes to mind for me is something that we've talked about before, RDPs, resilience data points.
Yes.
And I think this also relates to this broader conversation of like, when do you modify, do less, or take the red box versus when do you actually decide to persevere and go through? And I think most of the time, except maybe with like a high LSS situation like what I had going on this week, if you're at that level of like level 10 LSS, I think a bunch of red boxes is fine. But I think when you're like at that LSS of 7, or you have a cold, or it's just like really windy, or you're not feeling it, that's where going out and trying something and trying to see if you can build that resilience data point, I think is very, very valuable. And folding in some of these perseverance workouts into our week is very, very valuable from a grit perspective, which is something that will serve us a lot in our races. I think if every single workout that you do is one of those normal workouts, nothing to write home about, it was totally fine, it was great. I don't know that you're always challenging yourself to the point where if you encounter big uncertainties or crazy things that happen in a race or something like that, you'll be totally ready to handle it. So I don't know exactly what the right balance is, but maybe thinking about your life as like a third of the workouts will be kind of normal, a third of them will be adaptive, you might not be feeling it, so you make some changes, and a third will be, it is time to persevere and see if I can get through this. Or maybe it's like a quarter of each of those and a quarter of just a red box or something like that. But yes, I love the breakdown of these 3 different types, and knowing that all of those should be at least showing up in your training plan in some capacity, I think is very valuable.
Yeah, I think it's a spectrum, right? And I think that you can sort of mix them and say, was this a perseverance workout or was this an adaptive workout? Because they kind of meld together, right? But I think, one of the reasons why I started thinking about this was that, especially coming off, say, for example, like a sickness, is that, I've now this is my 3rd or 4th week of being sick. And the perseverance workouts tend to cluster, right? And there's one thing, so I've had a lot of perseverance workouts. And then it's just they become sort of outsized in my mind, right? I'm going through a pretty hard time right now to gain fitness or just to maintain fitness. And so they become kind of a big deal in my head. But for me, just sort of acknowledging and saying, hey, listen, this is just a period of time. We talk about periodization. This is a period of time where I may have to do more perseverance workouts than say just normal workouts. Like the normal workouts are coming. I just need to kind of work through some of this stuff, the chest cold, but it's coming. Don't put too much importance or value, or just like, they're very outsized in my head, right? Get very emotional about them is I say, hey, you're going to come out of this. But you do need to sort of walk out the door and, get your workout done. And it may not be the ideal situation, but, I think ideal is coming. It's coming. Hopefully it's coming soon.
Yeah, and I think there's also something really valuable about being able to actually name something. Like when something feels really, really hard, saying like, okay, think back, there is terminology for this. This is a perseverance workout. And that almost changes the mindset of like, how am I thinking about this? I'm not thinking about my perfect power, my perfect heart rate. I'm thinking about grit and I'm thinking about resilience right now and knowing that I am really upset. I'm emotional about this situation. I'm frustrated that I'm sick. I'm like upset that life has been like super shitty over and over again recently. And yet I am showing up and doing this. I think that can be really, really helpful. So I would challenge athletes to maybe if you're having a tough time, categorize things in your head as, hey, this is not a normal workout. These are not normal circumstances. This is an adaptive workout and it's time to say I'm not doing my pickups today, or this is a perseverance workout and I don't really want to do my pickups, but I'm going to try. That sometimes helps me when I'm able to just categorize things in a way that makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, as soon as it's just funny because I was going through this whole thing, and as soon as I came up with this thing like perseverance workouts, it's almost like the emotion of it was sort of like the air was let out of the balloon. It's like, oh, I've named it, I've acknowledged it, and suddenly it's like, oh, okay, like now it's sort of in control, if you will. Like now it's gone from like subconscious to conscious, right? And I'm like, okay, now I can sort of deal with it because I've got a name, I've got a category, and I've got a bucket to put it in, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think we need to make a dictionary of all these terms that we've coined on the podcast that have helped us think about our workouts in a more helpful way. And
Exactly.
perseverance workouts and adaptive workouts and normal workouts with the acronym, the NW or whatever it is, that's all going in there as well.
Exactly. Yep. This week, our favorite sage athlete, Charlie, dropped some knowledge in Training Peaks. And of course, I was always like, oh, this is so good. So I asked Charlie, can I read this in the podcast? And he was like, go for it, coach. So, all right. So for fans of this podcast, you know Charlie. He dropped some great knowledge last year during Ironman Lake Placid training. So anyway, so Charlie, this is Charlie's comment from this week. I showed up to the pool, executed programming to the best of my ability. Victory, all we can ask for ourselves. I've been so critical of myself and my training this cycle. A lot of red boxes since we started in 2025. I did a lot of reflection while swimming easy and couldn't really identify weeks or days where I could have done any better. One, maybe two sessions missed in 2 months due to goofing off, but otherwise, most days I'm just fighting hard to stay employed, be present as a husband, and to make it to bed early. When I was walking over to the pool, I was thinking about a skill that I haven't seen talked about very much on social media, endurance science blogs, or life lesson authors, which is losing gracefully. Sometimes life is a bigger, meaner motherfucker in the boxing ring and we're not coming out on top no matter what. Maybe I could have been better off long-term throwing in the towel, calling it wraps on the training cycle, and saving the fight for sunnier days. But I also think a big part of the point of endurance sports is to go down swinging and who you are when things aren't going your way. I have a feeling that over the years, I'll look back on these months and times I was able to show up with immense pride. There's a lot of daylight left in 2025, and I'm not ready to call it a loss just yet. I won't go as far as to say I have momentum going, but I'm feeling a little bit more centered and recalibrated for the coming weeks onwards.
Hell yeah, Charlie. He is always just leaving these mic drops in Training Peaks in a way that's so inspiring and putting really good words to, I think, something that is very, very relatable for a lot of our athletes. This reminds me of something we've talked about before, the idea that sometimes the life overhead is just really, really high. And that changes a lot about what you're capable of doing, how hard it is to even just do workouts that maybe another year would have been totally easy. I relate to the idea of life overhead this year has been totally insane. And it's not fair to compare a year like this to years that were just like mostly smooth sailing and regular life stresses and things like that. So I love this. And I think we can always just think about kind of next week, the rest of the season, all of that, and not necessarily dwelling on weeks where we had a lot of red boxes and knowing that sometimes those red boxes were the very best that we could do. Not to bring back my grandma, but she also was so big on like, just do your best all the time. And sometimes I think we really do have to just do our best, and our best is going to look different from cycle to cycle, season to season. That is totally okay.
Yep. Thanks, Charlie. And yeah, right. And it's super early too. It's still early in the season. We're still in the winter season here. So much of 2025 left. And like we talked about, like, don't write the narrative of a workout. Like, don't write the narrative of your season this early because we're really just getting going.
And sometimes I find you could, even if you're really struggling with writing a negative narrative, you could try actually writing a narrative that's a lot more positive. Like, hey, I had the biggest comeback ever. I had such a rocky couple of months
Yeah.
and it was looking terrible and I missed so many workouts, but I had so much accumulated fitness that it took me 3 weeks to get sharp and crush a race. You can definitely think about it like that. So if you have a bias towards the negative narrative, think about what the best case scenario would look like.
Yeah, I love that. We talk about leverage a lot, right? And these athletes who we've been able to coach for many, many years, or just maybe if you've been doing athletics for a long time, whether that's structured or unstructured, like every year builds upon everybody every other year. So even if you have a bad start to say 2025, if you've been in the game, if you've had these skills, if you've been racing, if you've been doing your sport for a while, like you're just building upon that every year. So you're not quote losing things. You're so far ahead. And I think some people get often surprised every day, like, oh, I got really good this year. It's like, well, you got good this year because you've spent the last 5 years like working on your craft.
Yeah, I love that. This actually reminds me too. I was having a conversation with an athlete a couple weeks ago, and it was all about how the idea of training is not necessarily always to elevate our very best day. Sometimes it's to elevate our worst day. And so if you think about kind of over time, you train more and more and more. If I think about me, for example, as an athlete when I was just starting the sport, 18 or 19 years old, my very best day on paper then would be a really bad day for me right now. If I went into a sprint triathlon and raced like I did at 18 or 19 today, I'd be like, what the hell is going on right now? And yet, that's just because fitness is cumulative. So I will have a bunch of bad days. Jim, you will have a bunch of bad days. All of our athletes will have plenty of bad days. But thinking about a rising tide over time of what your workouts look like, I think is a really nice way to frame that. And being able to step back and say, hey, even a day that's not so good for me right now is better than I was before because I have cumulative fitness and I have leverage, I think is a nice reframe for all these days that can objectively kind of suck.
Yeah, it's funny too because it's hard because the tide is rising, but the tide you can barely see it. If you sit out there and watch on the beach and you go, "Is the tide coming in or not?" You're like, "I can't tell." And what happens is you have to like wait for like months and weeks to see this thing rising, but it is rising invisibly, and it's so powerful because it's rising at such a slow rate, but it's flooding everything. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, let's see, the sea is definitely coming up, and there's no stopping this thing.
Yeah, and I would say the best approach there is like lay the bricks, build the foundation, but don't stare at the tide. Like just let it happen and you're gonna end up better off because it is very slow and it seems like nothing's happening if you sit there and watch it. It's like a watch pot never boils. The tide doesn't rise if you stare at it rising, but if you put the work in, it is going to rise kind of no matter what.
True, true, true. Our next one, really cool thing. So Audrey is one of our loyal listeners, sent along this article, and the article is called "Push versus Pull" by Brad Cooper, PhD, and there's a link in here. But I just thought this was really interesting because we talked about this. The push is something that we get like externally, like from a parent or a coach or a teacher that might help set us off on this journey, but it's really not like sustainable. It's not natural. It's not like an internal like drive, right? And so the other side of push is this thing he's calling pull, or he's also calling like force versus flow, or effort versus alignment, or got to versus get to, or should versus could. And he had this really good example. He said he had into the track and his workout was, I don't know, like 10 by 400 or something. And the plan was you need to run these 400s in X period of time. So instead of him approaching it with, I must hit this specific time or it's a failure, which is sort of this push attitude, he approached it with this pull attitude that incorporates a few qualities that evoke this greater sense of being. And so these qualities were like, first one was like, we talk about this all the time, which is gratitude, right? We're grateful for the chance to actually get the chance to go to these track intervals. And he's, this author is a middle-aged athlete, and he's like a lot of my friends just they're not even able to do this anymore. So I'm just super lucky that I'm here and grateful that I'm actually at the track to actually do intervals. So gratitude being the first one. The second one we also talk about a lot is just joy. And he defines this as the emotion that brings us into the experience of actualizing our potential self. I don't really know what that means, but I just know that joy, I know it when I feel it. And it's that big smile, that big, like, yeah, this is so much fun. We're having a great time. And usually joys I find mostly associated with doing stuff with other people. But anyway, bringing joy into the equation. His third one was curiosity, which I love this one, which is like, I wonder how fast I can run these, which sort of creates this intriguing and engaging personal mini journey when he's out there doing these track intervals. And then the fourth one, last one here is perspective. Like perspective reminds me not to take myself too seriously. And again, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, like perspective, or we talk about play as well too. Like this is sort of a kid's game, right? So he ends the article with the greatest, those who sustained high performance over extended periods to reach the utmost levels were pulled, not pushed, to those heights. Push harder is a myth. If we truly desire to scale new mountains, the pull provides the key.
Wow. I mean, this resonates a lot. And we've talked about it on this podcast before, but I will say the best race I ever had, which was probably last summer at Cedar Summit, was one of my first times truly and fully tapping into what was a pull force. I didn't define it as that at the time, but it completely swapped from being push to pull. And then I unlocked things I'd never done before. So I talked about how this year my goal has been like, how do I tap into pull effortfully and not be forced into allowing it to happen? But I like this framework for it. And I think trying to just either journal about or say out loud, what am I grateful for? What is making me happy? What am I curious about in my workouts is a nice way to be able to unlock that. This is really, really well said.
Yeah, I just love it too because I just resonated because we've talked about this so much. But I love that checklist. Like when I go out and say again, back to like a perseverance workout or something gets hard. Like, okay, wait, am I grateful? Am I happy about it? Am I curious about it? And let's put this in perspective. And I think those four things is like, oh yeah, that's what we've talked about a lot. And that to me would really help me sort of put me in a better mindset for especially for harder workouts or for races.
I love it. All right, next one here. I feel like we just have banger after banger, but keep going with these amazing inspirational bangers.
I think you should take the next one, which is I think this is very similar to what. So, I want to read out what Steve Magnus wrote this week because I just think it's sort of it's on the same theme.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love this. You brought this in, but this is an incredible reference. And we really, really like Steve Magnus. He just dropped some amazing bangers about training and coaching on a lot of different platforms. But what he says here is performance is about holding on to contrasting forces. We must care deeply, but let go, try hard, but be relaxed, set big goals, but be able to let go of the outcome, be obsessive on the field, but be able to take the jersey off, identify with our pursuit, but don't attach. Performing well in anything is about nuance and messiness. It's not cheap slogans we see on social media. The reality of reaching your potential in just about anything is navigating a world of contrasts. And I think that's so true. I mean, one of the biggest contrasts I think about all the time is how at the end of the day, what we do is really silly. And yet we hold it so tightly and we do care about it. And we have to care about it because we all need meaning in this world. But at the end of the day, it's like we're going out and we're swimming in a lake with a bunch of other people. And then we're like riding our bikes for a long time and it's kind of hard. And then we're running after that. And it's this whole crazy thing. And yet it is a way that we unlock kind of our true selves. But if we take it too seriously, it can sometimes just become a lot more stressful and not really what it's going to help us unlock the potential there. So this is great. Steve Magnus always has it absolutely dialed. And I think life is all about these contrasting forces and figuring out how to best balance them in a way that kind of speaks to you and creates meaning.
Yeah, part of this struck me because I've been thinking a lot about this year in terms of coaching, like especially on pool deck of saying I see people who are, very much they're very tight, they're really holding on to things and probably they're in this sympathetic state and they're kind of panicked in the water. And first like saying to them, like, we have to figure out a way to get you into this parasympathetic state, right? So we gotta get them relaxed. But you also have to have them engaged as well too. So this I think in the pool is really just it really shows up there because you can't be panicked or pushing hard, right? You can't be tense, but yeah, you have to be engaged in the water, right? And I've been thinking about this personally for myself as I try to get better at running this year and sort of hip extension. Like hip extension really requires me to be engaged, but it also like means like my belly, my core cannot be like tight, right? I've got to, and then my hip flexors are always super tight. So it's like, how do I go out and run faster and be sort of more mentally engaged and more mentally aware of where I am, but also like relax my hip flexors, let that hip travel, backwards, right? And so I've been thinking about this a lot. And when I get it right, it's magical because like, oh, I'm engaged, but I'm not tense. And I'm like, okay, there's just two forces that are happening here and they're happening very rapidly in the body. And it's kind of magic. But for me, I've been spending a lot of time just sort of specifically thinking about this when I've been working out and when I've been coaching.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because just like that happens physiologically, there's also this mental piece that needs to be focused but not obsessive about how much focus you have. And so it's like you want to be chilled, but you also don't want to be zoned out and all those
Right.
things. And I don't think I really have the answers on how to do that perfectly. I think sometimes I swing too hard in one direction or the other, but at least being able to set the intention of like, I know what the two forces are. I'm going to try to put myself somewhere in the middle when I feel too pulled in one direction, I think is the way to think about it. And I think mixing up the workouts that you're doing and how you approach it, sometimes running with music, sometimes doing your Zwift with a show, sometimes just tuning into your body and how it feels. I think different things like that are experiments that can help us tap into what these extremes looks like and then how we can land ourselves in the middle.
Yep. All right. Our next one here is I've been playing more around with low cadence cycling this year for myself and for some of my athletes. I've done a lot of this in the past, and there's always, quite a bit of people, some people say, oh, low cadence cycling, it doesn't work, and here's why it doesn't work, and here's all the science behind it. And you have other people going and say, oh, low cadence is the best. And the way I think about it is that generally the best in the world, whether it's bike racing or cycling or triathlon, they are including some level of low cadence cycling. So it is part of the program that we have here. And so anyway, I would encourage people to play around with low cadence. This could be like just as simple as getting in, say, for example, in Zwift, like playing Road to Sky and just doing low cadence at, say, 50 to 65 RPM. And generally, zone is, high zone 2, low zone 3, right? But lower heart rate. And I think this is particularly helpful for folks who are doing Ironman Lake Placid, like you should definitely be doing some low cadence because that course is a lot of low cadence. And so if you don't practice it, you're not going to be good at it on race day. And I also started thinking about a lot of the other courses around, especially around New England and even like, Chattanooga or just other places that along the Appalachian chain here, there's a lot of hills, right? And you're naturally going to end up in this very low cadence. And so do some low cadence work this year, this high torque work, and you'll become a better cyclist. You'll become much smoother and you'll be much more confident on the hills.
Yep, I have very few notes on this. I also love low cadence. I would just say if you haven't had a bike fit and you're having knee pain with low cadence, you need to get a bike fit. It's very easy for knees to get aggravated if you're not fitting exactly right on your bike. So just think about that as something that kind of gives you the ability to do low cadence stuff. If you're on a crappy bike where if it's not good, you could get injured doing a lot of super low cadence stuff.
I also say if you do adapt and start doing some low cadence stuff, one of the things I like to do at the end of any low cadence workout is just do a little bit of either normal cadence or high cadence work just in the end. So you just don't end up with like, I mean, personally, what happened with me is I started doing a lot of low cadence. And I started getting really just kind of lazy with my paddle stroke. And I realized like, wow, I've got really low. So me personally, I have to go back and do a little bit of high cadence work just to sort of like connect my feet and my brain because I sometimes will over index on low cadence and lose that connection. So one consideration is that, yeah, low cadence is just one tool in the toolbox, right? And you want to practice normal, you want to practice high cadence, you want to practice lots of different things, but just one more thing in the toolbox.
Love it. All right, next insight here. We're going to talk about interviewing a coach. Of course, we want everyone to be coached by us, except for our rosters are pretty full right now. So let's talk a little bit about your conversation with a new client this week, Jim.
Yeah, so I had a potential new client, and it's always very interesting because I always wonder when I first get on when I first get on a call, like I always think like, is this person introvert or extrovert, right? And so this person was very reserved, and so I was asking questions, and I was getting back maybe like one word answers or just for short phrases. And I just sort of thought, how this is interesting. Like obviously this person's shy and there's no judgment on that. But I thought this is sort of like a job interview and you sort of need to come prepared with lots of questions. You need to become prepared to tell your story because really this is a back and forth, right? And ultimately what you're looking for is this a cultural fit? And especially with this client, they're a very experienced runner. They've done, I don't know, 18 marathons or something, right? So we started talking about the specifics of workouts and plans and stuff. Like basically what my plan would be very similar to what they've already been doing for many, many, many years. And so I kept saying to this person, like, yeah, you're kind of doing all the right things. Honestly, like in terms of like the workouts, like there are no secret workouts and you're doing like a tempo run, you're doing a long run, you're doing a bunch of easy running. And I was showing them actually in Training Peaks, like, here's the plans. Like, does this look similar to what you're doing? They're kind of like, yeah, it kind of does. I'm like, okay, well, so we're not talking about you coming and getting workouts from me. What I think about here is, do we want to work together? Do I want to spend time together? Do I believe in what you're doing? So, and after a while, this person sort of opened up, but I just thought it was really interesting because it just felt like it's like a job interview. And again, like we're just trying to decide, like, do we want to spend time together? That's really what you're looking for when you're interviewing a coach or your job or I don't know, potential spouse, for example.
That's so funny. I love the idea of interviewing a potential spouse similarly to interviewing a new client. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think what's really interesting is the coach-athlete relationship is a very close one. Like at the end of the day, you are communicating pretty much every day in some capacity. Maybe it's just a quick Training Peaks comment or something, but you are developing this close relationship. And so you do want a relationship that's a two-way street with someone who's going to be a good fit for you. And I think I do fundamentally believe that not everybody is a good fit for every coach. There is a coach out there for everyone, but I've thought a lot more about goodness of fit on my end. A lot of it comes back to different types of values alignment. For me, it's a lot about it's like coachability and openness to new experiences. I never want someone to think that I have all the answers. I want to have a conversation about it, but I do want you to trust me that I'm going to do my very best to develop a plan that works for you and that is going to get us some good results. And if it's not working, we'll talk about it and we'll figure that out. But I think you had a second point here that I want to talk a little bit about, the really important point that anyone who's hiring coach, like they are the expert on them. You are an expert on you. And then the coach is the expert on best practices. So if you can really kind of bring those two things in, you'll go together. I find that there's more tension when either the coach tries to be the expert on the athlete or the athlete tries to be the expert on the best practices. If I have an athlete who thinks they're the expert on best practices, I'm like, do you really want to pay me? Like, does this make any sense? Because we're doing this transaction where I'm bringing the best practices to the table, but I'm not going to tell you, hey, I know your body better than you do. That is not anything that I'm going to do. And if someone is telling me something about them, how they're feeling, their fitness and their body, that is the number one thing that's going to factor into the plan. So I think it's all about kind of bringing those forces together and getting something really magical about it. But if there's disconnect on either side, then it's not going to work as well.
Yeah, it's interesting too because you think about like when I say like a coach is an expert on best practices, and we love it when athletes are curious and they're asking good questions and they're saying, "Oh, I've read this, I read that." Like I love those kind of conversations. But they're right. Like everything else in life, there's this fine line where you cross over and you go, "Wait, are we talking about curiosity or are we talking about you doing my job?" And like, and again, like you say, when you sort of cross over that line and it happens for a while, I will go back to the athlete and say, like, do you want to pay me? Because like, if you really feel like you got this under control, like you shouldn't be wasting your time on paying me money. Like I like working with you, but you should be paying money. And I usually end up with a good conversation about, like what are we really looking for in this coaching athlete relationship? And generally just by posing that question, things usually tend to work out and you sort of help sort of redefine categories a little bit and maybe a little bit boundaries. But anyway, it is a very interesting, I always say to people like, take your time because, hiring a coach is one of the biggest decisions that you can make, I think, in your life.
Yeah, because in its best form, these will be relationships that kind of go on for years. Often we've coached people for 4 or 5, 6 years, and you see them go through life and go through phases of life and go through lots of different races. And so you don't want to take that decision lightly. It's a pretty big deal decision. And I'm just grateful for kind of all the athletes who have taken a chance on me. And I've been so grateful for the relationships. We talk about how relationships are why we do this. That's at the end of the day, the most valuable piece of it. But it's a big one. So if you're talking to us anytime soon, know that it's a big decision. It's a big conversation. And we are not the right fit for everybody out there. And that is also totally okay.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, our last one, and this is the fun thought of the week, and that is your training should be like a kick-ass mixtape that you create for yourself or your friends and gets you pumped up and inspired. I can't take credit for this. I read this some random place somewhere. I thought, this is awesome. Like, who doesn't love the great mixtape, right? And of course, I have to explain to the younger people that mixtape is something that actually happened on an actual physical mixtape, but now it's it's a Spotify playlist, for example. But
Yes, I was going to say that. I was like, what is a mixtape? I mean, I know what it is, but like I've never used the term mixtape in any way. My generation only goes back to the fact that I had a Walkman at one point in my childhood that I would like listen to in the back of the car on long road trips, and I had a variety of CDs for that, but I did not have a mixtape. So make that Spotify playlist. Make it your training plan. You can have a coach who's like a friend help you with that Spotify playlist and make lots of recommendations. But at the end of the day, it needs to be fun and it needs to keep you kind of pumped and engaged and inspired and excited. Because if you're not feeling those good vibes when you turn it on, of course, there's sometimes songs that come through that you're like, this is not my favorite. Sometimes it's more of a perseverance song or an adaptive song or whatever that is. But
good.
On the whole, you do need to love that tape.
Right. There are adaptive songs, there are perseverance songs, but in general, we want your playlist to be like super pumped up, right?
In general, yeah, normal songs for the most part is how we talk about it. All right, well, Jim, I think let's land this plane. We have a couple more insights that we'll probably push to the next episode just in the interest of time, but we do have one listener question. So please tell us, Jim, what are the differences in swim speed between aerobic, moderate, and threshold?
Yeah, so I actually got this question twice this week, probably because, and first of all, like the blame is on me because I have these swim workouts and I'll mix terms like swim easy or swim aerobic or swim strong, swim moderate, swim threshold, and people started finally calling me out, going like, "Okay, dude, like what does all this stuff mean?" Like, which also means to me like I need to go back and get a little more consistent, a little more clarification. But anyway, aerobic to me, swimming is just easy swimming. Moderate swimming, I think about sort of like half marathon effort, like it's some additional effort over a zone 2, for example. Like say you're doing zone 2 run, it feels pretty easy. Moderate would be like, oh, I'm running half marathon pace. So there's some engagement to it, but I can still maintain it for a while. And then threshold is kind of going like I'm going all out. And one way to determine your threshold we've talked about before is, do 10 by 100s on 10-second rest. What's your average time? That's basically your threshold, right? So it's kind of a little bit fast. And then also we have these other terms. We have like as fast as possible, which of course is, or sprint. And obviously that's very self-explanatory. Go super fast, really work on that high end. But anyway, Kate, do you have any ways that you define or muddy the waters with swim workouts?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We've talked about how having different gears in swimming is actually such a hard skill that you build over time that I wouldn't worry too much about. Like, well, what's the difference between aerobic and easy and moderate and tempo and threshold? It's like if you can get an easier one, a more medium one, and a fast one, that's amazing. And there's lots of words that correspond to each of those. So easy is the same as aerobic, and then moderate's about the same as tempo or whatever. And the threshold is usually along the ones of fast. And then, of course, a sprint's going to be a little bit faster than that. But don't get too caught up in it. Just, I think if you have the intention of any of these going in, like I am doing something more medium, doing something more easy, and doing something more hard, you will be getting some of those important adaptations. And I always tell people too, like there's fast, but don't let fast be at the expense of good technique. I always tell people threshold or strong, anything except for that as fast as possible, which is usually kind of a flail for me too, is going to be like, what is the fastest that I can go while still maintaining good technique? Because often if you find that you just like start moving the water around and moving your body as much as you can, you're not actually going that much faster than if you went like a strong intention, but a little bit more control with your stroke. So it's not an exact science. And again, go into the water and do the best that you can in alignment with what these words sort of look like, and you'll be totally fine. The wind is getting wet, and even better if you could do something that's a little bit of change of speed.
Yeah, exactly right. Did you get to the pool? Yes. Did you get in the water? Yes. Okay, you won.
Yep, exactly. All right, challenge of the week and gear pick of the week. Challenge of the week, this has resonated for me a lot. I would say if you're going through it, so if you have a lot of LSS going on, even just a moderate amount of LSS, ask if someone can help you take something off your plate. People in your network almost always want to help. And I find I, at least, am often just too stubborn to ask, but there's so many people that want to be able to help you. You know, this could be asking your coach, hey, can I have some modifications? Like, this is stressing me out how much is in here. You could say to your partner, like, hey, can you take on this life or household responsibility? I just need a little bit of a break right now. You know, ask a coworker if they can help you out with something. Ask your boss if there's any flexibility on what's going on. I just find that sometimes it's a matter of not asking, not that you can't get that. And if you can't get it, then figure out other places in your life that you can cut some of the stress. But don't be afraid to ask. That is the challenge of the week.
That's hard for us. We're very self-reliant people, us, us endurance athletes, right? And we have a hard time asking for help. But I always find for myself when I ask for help, it's like, wow, people actually want to help. I can't believe it.
Yeah.
I've been in my brain, I've been so self-reliant for so long, right? It's like, it must be me. But it just turns out that the world is much bigger and cares about you. And so, yeah, I love this one. Mine is obviously persevere through a workout. This winter, particularly this winter, is providing plenty of opportunities to work on your grit.
I love that. And can I actually piggyback on that one? One thing that I have been thinking about a little bit too recently is that when you're not really sure about one of these hard workouts and you do think you want to persevere and push through, but you're looking at the calendar and you're like, oof, like the 2.5 hour ride on the trainer is looking really, really tough right now. Sometimes I'll try to do a mindset shift where I modify it down a little bit and I say, okay, I am going to ride for 90 minutes. And at the 90-minute mark, I will decide if I want to challenge myself and go to 2 hours or go to 2.5 hours. But then there's not the same feeling of like, oh, I didn't do it. I think that's maybe a way to kind of straddle this adaptive workout and the perseverance workout, where you just go in with like, all right, I'm adapting already. The goal is to get to 90 minutes. But if I want to challenge myself at that point, I will allow myself to do that. And of course, have all the fuel on board that you need to do the whole thing, have it nearby. But giving yourself that choice, you might find that you really surprised yourself. And you're like, hey, I hit my 90 minutes and I can actually crush this. On the other hand, you might have said like, okay, I'm going to run, 16 miles. I was supposed to do 20, but I'm going to do 16. And you might have to Uber home at 16. Like that's another thing that could happen. So if you want to think about how to get both adaptive and perseverance happening, that's another way to do it.
Yeah, I love it. It's actually funny you mentioned that because I've had this exact same thing. Like I have around here, like there's a 90-minute loop. And I've been some days when I've had like 2.5 hours I was like, okay, I'm just going to go do the 90-minute loop. And I can get to this point, maybe just like 75 minutes out. And then there's another little loop out there I can do, which will add like 15, 20 minutes or something, right? And I've got some little loops in town I can do 10 minutes. But no, that's such good advice. It's like, just start. Just go ahead and start. And it's okay if we come back a little bit short. But oftentimes if I get out there, I realize, unless it's like totally just like really cold and awful and I'm just miserable, generally I can just add on a little bit more. And so then I come back, I'm like, oh wait, maybe I said 2.5, but I got to 2 hours. I'm super proud of that.
Yeah. And the hardest time mindset-wise to do a 2.5 hour ride is right before you start. It's a lot easier to do a 2.5 hour ride when you've ridden 90 minutes. And it's only 60 minutes actually at that point. You can play these different mind games.
Yes.
But I find that for long runs too, like I have marathoners that are training, for example, it can be a lot easier to say like, all right, I'm going out for a 16-mile run. And then we're going to evaluate at that point what's happening next, rather than like, wow, I have 22 on the docket right now. That feels a little bit scarier. So trick your brain as much as you can. And I think you'll surprise yourself sometimes.
I always tell our Ironman athletes that the only time you have to actually go a marathon or do 26 miles is when you're in T2. Like as soon as you step out of T2 and you go down the road a little ways, you will have to do 25 miles. It's like, wow, okay, so it's only ever a marathon, 26.2 miles when you're in T2. Get out of T2, and you know what? Guess what? It just got less.
Yeah, I've thought about that so many times where often for me in an Ironman, the hardest part mentally is like miles 90 to 112 of the bike, because you're sitting on your bike feeling terrible. Usually you're very tired. If you're doing Lake Placid, you're climbing up the Three Bears and you're like, I still have to run 26 miles. And mindset wise, I always feel so much better once I start taking off because I've got however many miles, it's less than 26.2. It's 25 and then it's 13 and then it's 6. And sure, you're going to feel bad there, but you at least don't have to just stare down the hall of a marathon and know that that's coming.
It's only a marathon once. After that, it's less than a marathon.
Exactly. Oh, so many good insights today. All right, let's close this out. Gear pick of the week. Maybe I've recommended this once before, but we're sort of in our recycling era because there's only so many gear picks we can have for episode 71. I'm going to recommend Try Hard shower products. So these are really good for post swim if you don't want to have your skin shrivel up and die due to chlorine and you want your hair to look luscious and amazing. You can do Try Hard shower products. They have shampoo, conditioner, body wash, all that good stuff. I always keep that in my swim bag and it keeps my skin happy after my swim workouts.
So my question is, when you use this, do you do the classic Dartmouth after swimming? Do you go try hard on 3, 1, 2, 3, try hard?
In the shower, you can hear me just shouting, try hard on 3, 1, 2, 3, try hard.
Try hard.
Exactly. That's what I do. Yeah, you have to do that. It's actually on the label that like you rinse, lather, repeat, and then try hard on 3.
Awesome.
All right, Jim, gear pick of the week.
My gear pick of the week, I've been loving the Martin 320, which is basically liquid calories. It's 80 grams of carbs in a water bottle. It's just phenomenal. It's just all the energy you need, or most of the energy you need for an hour. They also have, I think it's a Martin 160, which is 40 grams. I've been using it as well too. But anyway, I've been stockpiling from the feed. I now have boxes of all this stuff. I think I have enough now gels and mixes for like the whole summer. So I think I need somebody to sort of stop me from buying stuff from the feed because I'm running out of room in the pantry.
There you go. Wow, that is impressive. I have another order that's coming from the feed that I've been waiting for, and I am low on gels, so it'll be good when that all comes in. But I have not tried the Martin product yet, so I'll have to check it out. All right, so this was great. Thank you for doing this with me as always, and I'm hoping that maybe next week we're gonna have less crazy bad news going on the horizon. I would love some just life normalcy, and my intentions and goals for the next week are to get caught up on sleep and caught up on fueling and caught up on all my training. But as always, just grateful for many, many things. And when bad things happen, always coming back to gratitude is a big one. And the pod is something I'm super grateful for. So thank you to our listeners. As always, consider dropping us a rating or a review. And we're looking forward to seeing you next time.
Normally, we end this podcast that you and I do together with I say thanks, peeps. But I'd love to end this podcast today with, what did your grandma used to say to you?
Oh, there were so many things. I mean, stay well was a big one. Take care of yourself was a big one. And I think she made it so clear how proud she was of me, of my brother Sam. I think I am so grateful to have someone in my life who is so clear about how proud she was. And I hope that everybody has a lot of people in their lives that tell them all the time how proud they are to, support, whether it's your athletic endeavors or just your personhood or whatever it is. That's something we can all be super grateful for. So stay well, peeps. Take care of yourselves and be proud of yourselves, because that's definitely what my grandma would say.